Alrighty, so today I finally finished recording and putting together episode 2 in this series. Now this video took way longer than anticipated. Previously I recorded all of episode 2, but that was on Ark Survival Evolved. And the night that I finished recording, I went to start editing, but then I seen that Ark Survival Ascended was being released. And so at first I thought it was just going to be a retexture of Ark Survival Evolved, and I was about to start just editing together episode 2, but I kind of wanted to check out Ark Survival Ascended. And so I waited all night, and I bought the game, installed it, and the game was completely different. The map was a lot different, and there was a lot of quality of life changes. And so I got pretty ambitious, and I decided that I was going to completely scrap episode 2, and I was going to start over the whole series on Ark Survival Ascended. The video would have been done a lot sooner, but the game was just having a really tough time trying to stay running on my PC. But I buckled down and steadily got recording, and my goal by the end of this video was to actually make it as far as episode 2 would have been. And so by the end of the video, I completely set up electricity, and I got a lot of important dinosaurs tamed. And so the reason I wanted to get electricity completely up and running was because I wanted to set up a building where I could put eggs, and then I wouldn't have any problems hatching them. And so in the next episode, I'm going to start going down the list that I made of all the dinosaurs that you can breed. But that's enough about the premise of the video. Let's get into it. With a tinge of deja vu, I got to gathering some starting resources. So I eventually found my way onto a rock while I was trying to get away from a Pegamastix. And it was around this time that I decided that I was going to completely commit to a plan. I wanted to build my base in the same area as the previous video, but I didn't want to have to worry about all the dangers that could be lurking while I was trying to gather resources. So I decided that I was going to get all the building components completely crafted up, and then I was going to put them on the back of a parasaur, and then I was going to migrate all the dinos that I had tamed. Having my entire first building completely prefabricated would be a pretty satisfying way to build my base. I decided that I was just going to copy a YouTuber's base designs. Specifically, there's a video on YouTube titled Ark, How to Build a Beginner House by Aaron Longstaff, and I decided that I was going to copy it part for part. But before that, there was a bridge that I wanted to construct across this river. I crossed this river all the time and I hated dealing with the piranhas, and so building a bridge would be pretty convenient. In the meantime, I was going to tame up any dinos that I came across. With my plans laid out before me, I got to steadily collecting resources. I soon realized that even in the easiest spawn location, there were still going to be dinos that I wouldn't be able to deal with beginner tools and weapons. Here I stumbled upon a baryonyx, and after a quick Google search I realized that I couldn't even use a bolo on him. Regardless of this, I still really wanted to tame him, so I was going to have to cook up a way to keep him distracted while I pumped him full of trank arrows. Soon after setting up the thatch foundation to my starter base, I noticed that there was a Spinosaurus rampaging in the forest nearby. Now this was definitely cause for alarm, but I was hoping that I'd get lucky and he would just wander away, and I decided to push forward with gathering resources. So I stumbled upon this really high level Dilophosaur, and this was significant to me because Dilophosaurs can slow down other dinos. I figured this would be a good strategy. If I could have this Dilophosaur slow down the Baryonyx, then hopefully it would give me enough time to put enough tranquilizer arrows into him. I also spent a bit of time taming up another Phiomia, just like the last episode, and again I named her Betsy. I decided to check out some of the farming, and I noticed that you didn't need to build pipes anymore, which is pretty convenient. I honestly kind of like the way that the pipe system used to work, and I also came to a major realization, which is that you don't need to build compost bins, you don't need to go out of your way to find fertilizer. As long as you have a Phiomia, if you get enough berries, then you can completely fertilize a pretty significant amount of crop plots. I was starting to amass quite a pack of Dilophosaurs. I was really starting to enjoy my progress, and I was getting pretty close to being able to make tranquilizing arrows. With these Dilophosaurs and these arrows, I was certain that I could tame my first Baryonyx. But something terrible ended up happening. At one point, I paused the game and I hit save, and I didn't know that once you hit save, the game would continue. And so I went AFK for I think like 2 hours, and when I came back, now it was a pretty disheartening sight to stumble upon a Spinosaurus completely ripping my base to pieces, but I didn't want to let this deter me. Looking at the silver linings, I at least got my Phiomia out, and I also managed to pull my really good Parasaur out of danger's way. It was a bit frustrating, but I decided that it would be best to just immediately get back and recreate the whole base over again. So I ended up finding another pretty decent level Dilophosaur, and I was roaming around with him whenever the Baryonyx finally attacked us. And it happened like way too quick for me to stop and start the recording. I didn't want to record everything in the beginning because I'd rather kind of record like the later on stuff that I had planned. I didn't want to run out of space. So I failed to capture the struggle, but I did end up capturing the taming process. Now it was a really low level Baryonyx, and it would be quite a while before I was able to get a saddle for him, but he quickly became my favorite dinosaur that I'd ever tamed. He could march up and down the river, feasting on all of the fish, and he could gather quite a bit of fish meat. So I spent a bit of time rebuilding up the base. After the Spinosaurus had ripped down my previous one, I realized that all the resources that I had gathered and stored in my storage boxes were scattered on the ground. And so I gathered them up real quick, and I gathered up a few additional resources, and I quickly put the base back together. This time I kind of put it off to the side so that I could have room to build a bridge. I also managed to find a Mosachops and a Lystrosaurus. The Lystrosaurus was really nice because if the Baryonyx wasn't following me around, then he could be passively gaining levels. Having these early crop plots down was really convenient because I didn't need to go gather berries to keep up narcotics production. The only thing that I ever grew was berries. I had plenty of crop seeds and I had all the resources that I needed to grow the crops, so I decided to set up some crop plots for actually growing crops. So I was out hunting with my Baryonyx when I noticed that they had a special ability. They could do a spin attack while they're swimming and stun everything nearby. And around the same time that I noticed this ability, I got to witness firsthand just how powerful it was. I didn't notice it right away, but this raptor was actually level 110. Even though my Baryonyx was way out leveled, fighting in the water, he managed to have the upper hand for the fight. Now I was getting pretty attached to my little base. Everything was running like clockwork, and it was pretty satisfying to be making progress. But I figured that I had been spending too much time here, and I decided that it was time to move on. So I took my Baryonyx and my Dilophosaur out on a hunting trip one night, and I started taming all the Parasaurs that I could run into. I was going to use a small herd of Parasaurs to gather all the resources that I needed for the bridge, and later on for the base that I was going to build. didn't plan on doing anything interesting while I gathered the resources for the bridge, so I decided not to record this process. And that was fine until I realized that I had constructed the whole bridge without recording any of it. But either way, the bridge was finished now. And I wasted little time putting it to use. Due to the density of the forest on the other side of the river, I was able to quickly gather all the wood I needed for the first building in my base. And in no time I was able to gather the requisite resources. I filled up a large storage box with the prefabricated building, and once everything was ready, I packed all of this onto 2 parasaurs and I marched them over to where I was going to build my base at. I spent a bit of time clearing up the construction site. And once everything was ready, I got to building. So at this point I had been playing for a couple of days, and finally I had a permanent base to call my own. Building and inhabiting a base like this is really fun. And throughout the rest of the episode I slowly made some minor adjustments here and there to make it feel more lived in. Most notably for the backyard fence, I slowly replaced it with half walls and filled in all the lower parts so that it didn't look like it was missing a huge chunk of the bottom. So I think it's super convenient how it's set up now. You can pick up anything you build anytime you want. And so this allowed me to go back to my previous building and pick up all of the furniture so I could furnish my new base. I also decided to bring along the crop plots, but it would actually be quite a while before I ended up setting up some farming. With everything packed away on my parasaurs, I whistled for everything to follow me for our final migration. With everything moved over, I spent a bit of time setting up and organizing the base. With the base fully established, I began to put some thought into the final goals of this episodic series and how I could accomplish them. The ultimate objective is to tame and breed every dino that I can in the game. So to make this a million times easier, I wanted to make it all the way to electricity and to set up a building that could be used for hatching eggs. Specifically, I wanted around 4 air conditioning units, and so that was my goal for the end of this episode. This would require a lot of experience points, and to expedite this process, I also wanted some dinos that could help with farming. The main dino I wanted to get was a Diplocalus. Having this dino would allow me to farm trilobites, and aid in collecting rare late game resources. These goals were good, but this was all a bit far away, and so to focus on something a bit more immediate, I decided to go on a farming run to get the resources to build up some buildings. I'd never been one to actively seek supply drops, but I started to realize how good the equipment was that sometimes they'll give you. Eventually in the episode, I started to tame a lot of pteranodons, and I began using them to fly around to supply drops. I spent the better part of an hour gathering wood, and by daybreak I had gathered a substantial amount. With the farming expedition done, I spent a bit of time upkeeping and organizing the base. these newfound resources, I laid down the foundations for 2 buildings that I wanted to get down. The first one was a storage depot built just like the last episode, and the other was a dedicated workshop, something that could house multiple workbenches, smelting furnaces, and eventually a fabricator. I laid out the foundations for another small building which I was going to use for the generator, but as I would find out at the end of the episode, electricity and how you set it up was completely different. I also went through the trouble of replacing all of the foundations in my main building with stone foundations. I also started the renovations on the backyard fence, but this took a lot more wood than anticipated, so it took a while before it was completely finished. I was out doing a hunting trip with some newly acquired raptors one day when I found a very nice piece of chitin armor. And so throughout the rest of the episode, I was slowly collecting more and more really good pieces of armor. It was also around this time that I started collecting and taming pteranodons. My goal was to get a number of them and level up all of their weight capacity, and then to find one with a high level and make this my main mount. And this one I was going to level up the stamina, and so combined together I would have 4 or 5 pteranodons that could carry a lot of weight, and then I'd have one that would allow me to fly all the way across the island with all of them. Eventually I decided that it was time to start upgrading to metal, so I crafted up as many metal picks as I could, and I got to farming all the nodes in the nearby mountain. This resource run was going fine until I went down to the river to get some water, and I found myself in a sticky situation. This is the most amount of Troodons that I had ever seen. After that situation was dealt with, I mined a bit more metal, and we eventually made it back to base. As the metal was smelting up, I figured this would be a good time to start crafting up some gunpowder. I wanted to consume all the charcoal that I had gathered, but I was a little short on flint, so I went on a quick gathering run. As soon as I had enough metal, I crafted my first long neck rifle. Now it would be a while before I had enough metal to start producing a lot of trank darts, and I also wanted to craft up some large bear traps. So while I waited on that, I decided to take my pteranodons on their first supply run. And the first place I decided on was to fly all the way to the northern part of the map to get some silica pearls. So this was the first time that I had been to the top of the volcano, and I was pretty worried whenever I noticed that there were some late game dinosaurs up here, but I was relieved when I noticed that they would burn up in the lava. This was also the first time that I had been to the northern part of the map, and only upon making it here did I realize that I didn't have adequate supplies. I didn't bring things like a fireplace or even a bed, but I had flown all the way here and I didn't want to fly back with nothing, so I decided to stick around and get at least some silica pearls out of this. The only place that I knew that had easily accessible silica pearls was here, and currently it was teeming with saber-tooths. I was either going to have to come up with a plan, or risk dying trying to retrieve some of these silica pearls. There was some silica pearls that I could reach, but a small handful wasn't going to make this trip worth it. Luckily, luck was on my side. I went to collect some hide to make a bed, and to make a couple more pieces of leather clothing, and when I came back, some RGs had taken care of my saber-tooth problem. I didn't know if they were hostile towards me, so I did my best to avoid them, and I quickly collected all the silica pearls that I could reach. I only managed to gather 82 silica pearls. This wasn't as much as I had hoped, but the rest of the pearls resided in shark-infested waters. I decided to call this good enough, and I wanted to come back later on with some more adequate gear. To make it a bit more worth my while, I stopped by the volcano, and I gathered up some obsidian. So this entire time I had been playing with the lowest graphics settings, even global illumination, so I wasn't able to see supply drops from across the map. And this was the moment that I pieced together that I could use my pteranodons to actively search out supply drops. So I went to go check them out. The quality of the loot in the supply drop really made me want to check out more supply drops in the future. Once I made it back to base, I realized that I had over 200 units of metal, so I put the workbench to work crafting up some bullets. And after I had crafted up a substantial amount of bullets, I went ahead and started crafting up some tranquilizer darts. I went searching for some extra pteranodons, and while I was back at base gathering some resources to help tame, I realized that I could craft the baryonyx saddle. While these pteranodons were taming up, I decided to do a bit of fishing. Eventually I tried my hand at diving. I wanted to check out the ocean floor, and the most interesting thing I discovered was that I could actually get silica pearls right here. It was pretty inefficient to use a baryonyx to get all the way down to the silica pearls, so I decided to continue my foray into diving once I had a more adequate dinosaur. I was on my way back to my taming dinos when I stumbled upon the highest level pteranodon that I had seen thus far. Now this guy would take a while to tame, but I figured that it'd be worth the wait. Using most of the raw prime meat that I had recently collected, this high-level Pteranodon ended up taming way faster than I anticipated. I ended up naming him Lightning, and once he was done taming, he was almost level 120. So this meant that he was definitely going to be the main flyer. With all the metal that I had been smelting, I crafted up some large bear traps, and went searching for a therizinosaur. It wasn't long before I found one. I laid out all 10 of my bear traps in a line, and prepared to take them down. The therizinosaur didn't even manage to make it to the 4th bear trap before being got. The tame took about half an hour, but once it was finished, I finally had a dino that would be pretty decent at gathering wood. It would be a while before I had the saddle, but at least for now I had something that could defend the base. I went on a quick hunting trip with some raptors, and I decided that I should start cooking and collecting all of the prime meat that I had been gathering. After a couple more hunting trips, I knew that I'd need a lot more metal in the near future, so another mining trip was on the menu. I mined every single metal deposit in the whole area, so I went out of my way to collect some flint while I was out. I found an iguanodon on my way back to base. I quickly knocked him out, and while he was taming up, I made a quick pit stop to the base, to store all of my newly acquired goods, and to set the metal to smelting. I was hovering around waiting for the iguanodon to tame, when I laid eyes on some wild raptors. I quickly gathered some resources for some bolas, and when I was getting some bear traps set up for defense, I got jump scared by a troodon. Taking down these raptors went nothing like I had planned it to, and trying to rely on the bear traps almost got me killed. I ended up just bowling both of them. I stumbled onto another raptor, and once everything was tamed up, I brought everyone home, having made a significant increase in my dino stopping power. After this expedition, I was finally high enough level for the therizinosaur saddle, so I quickly crafted it up and immediately took the Theri out for its first wood run. I was pretty disappointed to see that the Theri could no longer hit multiple trees at once, but it still made farming trees a lot quicker. And within about 20 minutes, I was able to completely fill a large storage box with wood. With this excessive amount of wood, I finally decided to finish the backyard fence. I consumed a significant portion of my thatch, so I decided to bring 2 parasaurs alongside my moss chops to hopefully deal with my thatch and fiber problems forever. This also served the dual purpose of gathering a lot of narcoberries, which would allow me to craft a significant amount of narcotics. I took my raptors out on a hunting trip and we found a brontosaurus, and this would be the first time I took one down. This fight was a lot closer than I had wanted it to be, and many of my raptors almost died. When I made it back to base, I also crafted up a second long neck rifle. This was so that I didn't have to switch ammo in the middle of a fight. I immediately got to put it to use, as the first shot on an alpha raptor that was wandering a bit too close to my base. I decided to take my pteranodons on a supply drop run, and so we roamed around the island looking for the best supply drops that I could find, and getting all the goodies that they had to offer. I only managed to gather a couple pieces of good loot, as most of the supply drops either disappeared before I made it to them, or there was just too many dangerous dinos for me to stop by. I originally planned on making it all the way to the harpoon gun and crafting up one of these to tame a megalodon, but I realized that even crossbows would be able to shoot underwater, so I set out to tame a megalodon. I eventually got one to follow me into a reef, where he ended up getting stuck on some coral. So this was a pretty easy tame, but it was pretty low level, so I figured even if he was attacking me, he wouldn't have been able to stop me from taming him. So I quickly crafted up a megalodon saddle and made my way over to him. Now I was really excited to explore the oceans with an actual aquatic dino, and the first thing I wanted to search for was for the oil deposits, the ones with the black streaks. But after searching for a while, I couldn't find any, and so I looked it up on YouTube and I found a video where someone was talking about these blue coral things. The old oil deposits still exist in the game, but they're way deeper, and now we have access to these blue corals which will give you oil. Now it's got a really low gathering rate, but after I mined enough of it, I managed to gather enough to fuel a fabricator for at least a while. So I went back to base, crafted up a fabricator, and put it in the workshop. I went out on a hunting trip trying to get some hide for some gasoline when I realized that one of my raptors had accidentally hit a dimorphodon. Now this dino can be pesky even when they're low level, but this one was level 145, and so he was a real problem. I even tried running away from him like really far, and he ended up following me all the way down to the beach. Something went wrong with the recording, but eventually I managed to get him down, and I figured since he was so powerful, I might as well use him in my pack. I used my newly crafted and freshly fueled fabricator to craft up some electronics. And while this was happening, the dimorphodon finished taming. I also crafted up a canteen. There was a therizinosaur a bit too close to my base. I already had a pack of carnivores out, so I decided to go on a quick hunting raid. And that's when I got a pretty alarming message. A megalodon had been killed. I wasn't really worried about it though, because it was pretty low level, and there was actually something much better at deep sea exploration that I wanted to tame. The Diplocalus. I'm pretty sure I found the culprit. There was an alpha megalodon skulking through this reef, so I ended up getting in a pretty lengthy fight with him. And I figured that these would be some pretty good levels for my baryonyx. I also placed down this little platform to put a bunch of campfires on, so I could quickly cook up a bunch of prime meat after a hunt. I was getting pretty close to having electronics all over my base, so I decided to do the first real run with my pteranodons by taking them to the volcano to collect a bunch of crystal. Once I landed on the brim of the volcano, I found a couple of dinos that I had never seen before. So I told all my pteranodons to land, and I got to baiting these carnivores into the lava. With these two big dinos dealt with, I called down my pteranodons and had them hang out at the bottom of the volcano. It was a really long process, but eventually we were able to gather a couple hundred units of crystals. I wanted my workshop to be able to handle a lot of resources, so I put down 3 more smelting furnaces. It was getting to the point where I was starting to gather a lot of rare and valuable resources, but to really push things over the top I needed to get a Diplocalus. That way I could farm trilobites, as well as have access to the bottom of the ocean for all sorts of pearls. So I went and hung out in the swamp for a while, but it was really tricky because every time I found a Diplocalus it would immediately get eaten. And on top of that, my frames weren't doing so well in the swamp. So I was checking out a map online of where Diplocalus spawns, and I decided to go check out another location. I finally made it to this little swampy cove, and my frames were doing a lot better here. On top of that, I found a couple Diplocalus, but there was a couple of Sarcos in this swamp, so I decided to deal with them, and I ended up taming one of them. Once these two threats were dealt with, I got a good shot with a bolo on a Diplocalus and I ended up taming him. It took quite a while, but this gave me plenty of time to plan my exit. Something went wrong with the recording whenever both of these dinos ended up taming, but I settled on naming the Diplocalus Fred. And once the Sarco was done taming, we took off for the base. Something went terribly wrong with the recording, so I won't be able to show our long trek back to the base, but really it was just us swimming out in the ocean for like an hour. I was really excited to use this Diplocalus, so I donned all of my warmest clothings and I set off. Fred here was my favorite dino by far, and I probably spent 4 straight hours right away just swimming around in the ocean searching for trilobites. Trilobites were really rare to find, but eventually I found a pretty decent amount of them. We had one pretty close call, but once we made it up to a beach and I force-fed him all of the raw meat that I had gathered from the trilobites, he was doing alright. I decided that I didn't need to put points into anything else, so all of his levels would be put into health. We swam around for a really long time exploring a humongous part of the map that was underwater, but before long I ended up gathering a pretty significant amount of resources. So we came back to the base, and I was getting pretty close to the point where I could start setting up electricity. There was only a couple of things left that I had to do. I went on a really long flint gathering run, and I also went on 2 more metal runs. I took my parasaurs out and we gathered metal from the mountain, but I realized that there wasn't a whole lot of metal left around, so I'd have to wait a while for it all to respawn back in. So what I ended up doing was taking my pteranodons back to the volcano to gather the metal nodes that were up there. Finally, after 2 weeks of playing this game, I was getting pretty close to the point where I would have electricity and I could set up the building that would be used for hatching the dinos. I next decided to do a bit of base upgrades. I put some stairs on the workshop. I put some large storage boxes in the storage depot. I also decided that I wanted my base to expand down onto the beach, so I built up a really nice looking staircase all the way down the cliff face. I wanted to set up some farms down here, and I started with the narcoberry farm. Once that was all set up, I went on one last really long stone gathering run. And finally, I set down my first generator. With this setup, I also put down some of my first lights. And I also finally got down my first air conditioning units. Now that these were in place, I was about ready to start breeding and hatching all the dinos in the game. But sadly, I started running out of space, and I figured that this video was going to be pretty long, so I decided to cut it here. I really enjoyed making this video. I really enjoyed playing Ark Survival Ascended, and if you enjoyed sticking around, be sure to leave a like. And if you want to follow through with the rest of this series, be sure to subscribe. Peace.